Clare Sudbery, and I'm a lead developer with ThoughtWorks. So for those who don't know ThoughtWorks, we're an IT consultancy. Probably the simplest way to describe what we do is that we help our clients to build better software. So as a lead developer with ThoughtWorks, often playing a technical lead role within teams, one of the things that I find myself doing frequently is teaching new skills to the developers of the clients that we're working with. And the kind of things that I'm likely to be helping them to learn is often new practices, so around XP, extreme programming, things like pairing, things like test-driven development, things like continuous integration and deployment. But also, you know, they might just be learning new technologies. There's really no end to the types of things that the developers have to learn in any company, in any team. Developers have to learn new skills all the time. And in my position as a lead, I'm helping with that. So I found myself teaching new tricks to developers a lot. And a lot of the time, these are developers who are not new, they're not young, they've been around for a long time, but that doesn't mean that they don't have new stuff to learn. I used to be a high school maths teacher, so I have got some experience of teaching. Actually, my career as a high school maths teacher didn't last very long at all. But still, I've got a bit of experience of teaching, and that I find that helps me. I can bring that into my role. But to be perfectly honest, any teaching is easier than being a high school maths teacher in Britain. So what I've done is, for the first part of the talk, I've split it into two sections. I'm going to start by talking about principles, so just general principles that I think we should all be applying when we're teaching each other. And then I'm going to talk about some specific strategies that I use when I'm teaching. So principles is the first one. And the very first principle of all is that I am not perfect, and you probably aren't either. So why do I think it's really important to... Oh, I've missed it, sorry. That says we're all teachers. I'm going to get to that. But what I really want to talk about is not being perfect. So I'm not perfect, and that should be obvious because really nobody is. But I think it's really important to call out because I think there's a real temptation when you're standing in front of an audience like this and you're speaking from a position of authority to feel like you have to project yourself as being some kind of image of perfection. That I'm going to share with you a lot of techniques and a lot of strategies and a lot of principles, and it'd be very tempting for me to tell you that I do all of these things all the time brilliantly. Because I'm supposed to be in a position of authority and you're supposed to pay attention to what I say, so it's tempting for me to think like I should, you know, make you think I'm amazing. And sometimes I am, but I am not perfect and I make mistakes. I'm sometimes lazy, I'm sometimes impatient, I'm sometimes forgetful. And there's a real point to me saying this to you because as a teacher, I think it's very important to give people realistic ideas of what they can achieve. And if you try and imply to them that there is this state of perfection that they can reach and that they should be aspiring to, they're going to fail. Because none of us are perfect, we're all going to make mistakes. And what I'm going to give you is a set of guiding principles, and I'm going to accept that all of us are going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And that's really important when you're learning, to accept that you will make mistakes and to accept that that's okay. Not just that it's okay, it's crucial, because that's actually how we learn, by making mistakes, because we're all human. And I also want to remind myself of that I'm not perfect and that's okay. But within that, I think we're all teachers. Now, I'm not assuming that everybody in the audience is in some kind of leadership position. Although, can we just have a show of hands for people in the audience who are tech leads, team leads, some kind of leadership position? Okay, I'm going to vaguely say that's a little bit less than half, but, you know, based on I. But that's fine, because we're all teachers. We all should see ourselves as teachers. If we're working in software, if we're working in this industry, then we should all be learning and we should all be teaching. We should constantly be learning new skills, and we should be consciously thinking about how we can share those skills with our colleagues. And it doesn't matter how inexperienced we are, chances are we will have something that we can teach to our colleagues. And having that attitude constantly of teaching and learning and seeing that as being absolutely embedded in our practice, I think is really important. So another principle is around elitism, and I think it's a bit of a problem in our industry. I think we have a tendency to worship some people as being the elite and worry when we're not in it and feel like we ought to be in it and try to, join the club of the elite, but also to see maybe ourselves as a whole industry as being some kind of elite. So we're the ones who know about computers. They're the ones who don't. They're annoying and idiotic. The whole concept of PEBCAC, if you've heard of that, problem exists between chair and keyboard. This kind of idea that we're better than them. And whether the them is those people outside the industry or the them is the people on your team who you don't think are good enough, it's not a helpful attitude. It doesn't help people to learn, and it doesn't acknowledge that everybody has something to learn. And as soon as you put them into another category as being somehow lesser, you prevent them from learning. And you put obstacles in the way of them learning, believing that they can learn, or even wanting to learn. Which brings us to empathy. So on the original version of this talk, I just kept having slides that said empathy constantly. Empathy, empathy, empathy. But I didn't really talk about what it meant. And if you want to learn yourself and if you want to help other people learn, it will be really helpful if you can put yourself into other people's shoes. So this is about understanding when somebody doesn't know how to do something. When somebody appears stupid, why is that? Is it because they are incapable of learning? Rarely true. Sometimes true, because we all have aptitudes. There are some things that some people find harder to learn than others. But is it because they're feeling insecure? Is it because they're unmotivated? Is it because they didn't sleep very well last night? Is it because they've got somebody at home who's dying and they're caring for them? There are lots of reasons why people might appear to be stupid or incapable or not cooperative. But if you try and understand where they're coming from, if you show empathy, then you're a lot more likely to make progress. And the same goes if you're learning as well. If you're learning from somebody, if you try and understand where they're coming from, try and put yourself into their shoes, it's really helpful. I also want to talk a bit about diversity. So, as somebody who is a member of an underrepresented group in this industry, I'm aware of what it feels like to feel like you're on the outside or you don't belong. And all of the techniques that I talk about are also about being inclusive, about, treating every member of the team as somebody who's important, who has something to contribute, and thinking about how you can enable that, what their own individual needs might be, and how you can pay attention to them as an individual. And thereby, by building those inclusive atmospheres and teams, make it more likely that diverse people will want to join your team. And diversity is a really good thing. So there's tons of studies that have shown that companies make more money when they have more diverse teams. They're more effective, they're more efficient. Doesn't mean that everything's rosy. Actually, one of the reasons that diversity is good is because it increases conflict, because you have people with different ideas, and that's good. It's good when people disagree with each other. It's good when you have alternative ideas of how to do things coming into your teams. So that was just a set of guiding principles. So now we get into actual strategies that I use when I'm trying to enable teams and help them to learn new stuff. And the first one is pairing. So I really, really love pairing. It's in ThoughtWorks, it's just our default. We try to pair on everything. Whether we have whole teams of developers or whether we have developers embedded within teams, our default is that we want to pair with each other. And actually, it's still relatively rare as a ubiquitous practice in the industry. It's still something that we face quite a lot of resistance to. And I totally get that, because I remember when I first came across I've been in the industry for 20 years, and when somebody first described the concept of pairing to me, I was like, you what? That just sounds ridiculous. So you're saying that I would be spending my whole day sitting at a computer with somebody else doing the same piece of work together? That sounds like hell. First of all, people are annoying, and what if I want the loo, and what if I just feel like doing a bit of Googling, and what if I just want to get my hands on the keyboard and be a control freak? Like, I really didn't like the idea. But it was really interesting. And to be perfectly honest as well, I mean, when I first joined the industry, one of the things that attracted me about the idea of being a software engineer is that I would be able to spend my whole day talking to a computer and not having to talk to people. So, I didn't like the idea of it at all, but it's really interesting. As soon as I started doing it, I just very quickly, and that's not true for everybody. Personally, I very quickly saw the benefits, very quickly felt the benefits. And particularly in the context of learning, pairing is fantastic. So one of my favourite things about pairing is that when it's done well, so I mean it's a skill. You can't just shove two people together and say, you go and pair, that's it, you're done. There's a lot that involved. It can be incredibly tiring. You have to be really mindful of the person that you're pairing with. You have to pay attention to their needs. You have to try not to hog the keyboard. You have to be able to speak up if they're hogging the keyboard. There's a lot to learn in pairing, but it's worth it. And in the context of teaching, the great thing about pairing is that somebody does something and you go, oh, hang on a minute, what was that? What did you just do then? And you get to see all of the little things that people do as part of their daily workflow that they wouldn't necessarily tell you if they were just kind of teaching you, if they were just kind of presenting it to you as a passive audience and trying to tell you how they do their job. They'd forget half of it. They wouldn't even consider it worth telling. But when you're working with them, you see all those little keyboard shortcuts, or you see a place where they're being inefficient and you tell them, did you know you could do this? And they're like, wow, I never knew that, And that's great for learning all those little things. It's also great for, I found, increasing your own confidence, because I think most of us in this industry have a lot of insecurities, and you think that everybody knows more than you do, and you think you're stupid and all the rest of it. And when you see other people Googling stuff, other people asking questions, the same simple questions that you ask, you're like, oh, right, so they don't know everything. And that can be really enabling. So the picture is just there because it's a great picture. That's what it looks like when pairing isn't working. And it's worth knowing that it doesn't always work. It's worth being aware that it's something that you have to put effort into. It's something you have to talk about. It's something you have to be sensitive about. But in the context of learning new skills, learning new domains, learning new technologies, putting two people together is a really effective way of doing it. And it doesn't even have to be that one of them is really experienced and one of them isn't. It's not necessarily a teacher-pupil scenario. You can put two people together with exactly the same level of experience and they can learn together. Or you can put two people with just a mild differential and they will learn from each other. It's really useful for that. And also, again, so you might have somebody in a team who is a much less experienced developer, who in terms of their skills hasn't been doing it for very long, but they know a domain. They might have been working in a particular area of the code. They might pair with somebody who's much more experienced than them, but doesn't know this area of the code, doesn't know this domain. And that's a great experience for them, to feel that they can teach something to somebody more experienced. That's really useful. Another thing that I'd like to call out is the workshop. And this is something that I've done a lot when I've been working with teams. So we'll hit it's particularly useful if you hit a particular technology or language that maybe everybody in the team doesn't know, or maybe some people in the team don't know. And then what I tend to do is I just knock up a quick workshop. And typically for me, my default format for that will be that I will go online, find a tutorial, spend a little bit of time tweaking it to make it work for the audience that I know I have, and then run through exercises as a group in pairs with regular breaks to come back together, coalesce, look at what you've learned, maybe switch the pairs around a bit. So I'm experienced, so I feel confident that I can do that with little preparation, which is important because none of us ever have any time. So you don't have to spend a week preparing a workshop, particularly because what I'm talking about is I'm not talking about going to a conference and selling a workshop in a place like here. I'm talking about doing a little workshop with your team. So you're not being paid thousands of pounds for it. You don't have to have beautiful resources. It's just a way of facilitating learning within the team, and it's okay if it doesn't go well. At the end of the workshop, have a retro. How did that go? What went well? What didn't go well? How would we like to do it differently next time? You don't have to feel like you're the expert in the room. You can just be somebody that's facilitating some learning and doing a little bit of preparation and helping people to get to where they need to be. And a very similar concept is group learning. And I've called it out as a separate thing because this is where you're not even setting yourself up necessarily as a facilitator. You're not even necessarily preparing anything in advance. You're saying, let's get together as a group. Some people call it mob learning. Let's just get together as a team. Let's pick a resource. So again, tutorials abound online. Maybe you have a membership to something like Pluralsight. But find a resource and go through it as a team. And then you can go off at tangents if you want. If everybody in the room is agreed, there's this bit here that we're particularly interested, let's explore that. Or this bit here we don't really care about, let's skip over it. But to get together as a group and learn together can also be a really, really useful strategy. And again, there are ways that you can format that. So one of the ways that I really like is that you take it in turns for one member of the group to be the driver. And they're the person with their hands on the keyboard, and either everybody else is telling them what to do, or you have one navigator and then you keep rotating. So one person is telling them what to do. And in group learning, I tend to find everybody in the room says, right, well, click on that, do that, how about that? And you take it in turns to be the person at the keyboard. So one of the things that I do want to say is that and this I know as a teacher, this is something that I really fell foul of as a teacher. So I was a maths teacher, and I thought that it would be a fantastic idea for me to teach maths to teenagers in schools because I love maths. And therefore, any barriers would all be overcome by the fact that I love maths. And I could just be enthusiastic about maths and it would just be infectious. It doesn't work like that. Most teenagers hate maths. Most people hate maths, but teenagers in particular hate maths. They're forced to be there. It's a compulsory subject. They don't have any choice in the matter. And it doesn't matter how enthusiastic you be at them. It's not going to make them want to learn or make them be able to learn at a pace that you might be used to. So for me, I'm good at maths. I've been doing maths for a really, really long time. I have a degree in maths. So it's quite difficult for me sometimes to appreciate what it feels like to be a teenager who hates maths and doesn't have all of the same context that I have. And I found it very easy for me to just put too much information in front of them, to give them too much to learn at once, and then I would be faced with a room of faces that look like that. And the same thing can happen with teams, you know. Be sensitive to how people are receiving the information that you're giving them. Make sure they're not being overwhelmed. Be aware of what speed people are moving at. And actually, I know that I often find that if somebody rattles through a whole load of information in one go, I still find that I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, I know, you completely lost me and now I'm panicking. So be sensitive to that. You know, if you need to slow down, slow down. When you have a room full of people, chances are they're going to be moving at different rates. So if you're in the scenario of a workshop or group learning, which is partly why it's good to put people in pairs, because then it's a lot easier for them to move at their own pace. But still, when some people are moving faster than others, a really good way of addressing that, and this applies in the classroom as well, is to get the people who are leaping ahead to help the people who are struggling. And don't feel like you're holding them back by doing that. You're not. You're pushing them forward, because teaching is how to consolidate your knowledge. So if somebody knows something, is getting something that somebody else isn't getting, if you get them to explain it, it will consolidate their understanding. It will deepen their understanding whilst also helping the other person. Which brings us to learning by teaching, which is something that I make a lot of use of. So last year I was on a project with ThoughtWorks that was going to be using ClojureScript. I didn't know Clojure. And I thought, oh, it's about time I learned Clojure. It's about time I learned a functional language. So, and it just so happened, there's an organisation in London called Clojure Bridge who run regular kind of day-long workshops, and one of the organisers works for ThoughtWorks, and she was asking for volunteers to come and help run this workshop, and it was a workshop aimed at beginners. It was a day-long workshop on a Saturday aimed at beginners. And I volunteered to help run the workshop, just as a kind of a helper, because they actually had a lot of people helping out. I didn't know closure, so what I did was I ran through the materials that they were going to use. I ran through the syllabus the day before. And obviously this is in the context of I'm an experienced developer, I've been in the industry a long time, I have a lot of transferable skills. So for me, spending a day working through a syllabus is not the same as these people who are going to be the subjects of the workshop, who barely knew anything about coding, let alone closure. So I could learn enough that I could help those people to learn. And so I spent a day running through the syllabus and then a day working on the workshop. And I learned so much more that way than if I'd have just said to myself, I'm going to go away and learn closure. Teaching is a really good way of learning. And it's really worth paying attention to that. Another thing that I like to do with teams is encourage team members to deliver lunchtime learning sessions to the whole company. And it's something that we encourage a lot at ThoughtWorks with our clients. People call them lunch and learns, they call them brown bags. There's lots of different titles for them. But the idea that you encourage people to get up and tell an audience about something that they know. And this can be anything. You know, this could be knitting, which actually gets very mathematical. It could be, you know, anything at all. It could be magic tricks. Or it could be, you know, the latest JavaScript framework that they've been learning in their spare time, or, you know, some amazing new library that they've started working with. It could be anything at all. But when you encourage people to share their knowledge and you show appreciation of the knowledge that they have and encourage them to think that other people might be interested too, then what you're doing is you're just fostering that culture of teaching and learning. You're fostering the idea that learning is a good thing, that knowledge is a good thing, that whatever you know is exciting, and that other people might be able to get excited about that too. And just that general attitude and environment is a really good place to be in this industry. Because we are constantly learning. So I mean, I will say this over and over, but there's no such thing as a software engineer who knows everything, or a business analyst, or a project manager, or, you know, there are no roles in this industry where you can just get there and that's it, you've done it. It doesn't, that place does not exist. So not only does the place where you've learnt everything and you know everything not exist, even though it might seem like it, you might have people in your companies who seem like they know everything and who you're a bit intimidated by because they know everything and you don't. And there might be people who think they know everything, although actually, generally, the more you know, the more you realise how much you don't know. But that doesn't exist. That is not I can't think what the word is, but it's not a place you can reach. I can't think what the word is anyway, but so not only is it possible to know everything, not possible to know everything, it's also not helpful to think that people might know everything. So, and the other thing is that, so sorry, that's what I was thinking. There's two things that you might think. You might think that you can reach a particular state where you know everything in a particular field, and you might think that there are people who know all the fields, you know, who know all the technologies and all the contexts, but those people don't exist either. So in any one area, generally, there might be some really, really discrete areas where you get to a point where you know everything, but it's bound to change. And so we have to acknowledge that and we have to embrace it. And rather than being scared of it, we have to say, you know what? It's not possible to be in this industry without having to learn constantly. And if we don't embrace that, then we've got a lot of problems. And not least, we have a problem in recruitment because there's a really strong tendency in the industry to say, here's a list of things that I want from the next person that I recruit. And I'm going to get them in a room and I'm going to go through this list of things. I'm going to say, do you know about that? Do you know about that? Do you know about that? Prove to me that you know about that. Prove that you have these things just kind of living in your memory, which is ridiculous because none of us actually operate on that basis. We look stuff up all the time. So what is the point of interviewing somebody and asking them to prove that they have memory of things that you won't need them to have memory of in their day-to-day work? But also, you don't want to recruit people. Yes, okay, so you need somebody who can hit the ground running. I would argue that companies should be recruiting people who are brand new to the industry, and they should be training them up, because otherwise we're never going to get enough people. But yes, there will be contexts where you need people who have some knowledge of some of the technologies that you're working with. But you'd be surprised how much people can learn. Don't restrict yourselves by being really anal about that. There's no need, because people can learn and people should learn, and you want to encourage them to learn. What you want is an aptitude. What you don't want is just hardwired knowledge. And because that's true, I make a point of asking questions all the time. I have to confess, so this is one of the ones where, it would be tempting to tell you how amazing I am, because I ask questions all the time, and the reason I ask questions is to set a good example, and that's true. So I ask simple questions as much as possible. I ask for clarification. If I think there's any chance that anything is not being understood by anybody, I will ask a question. And I don't care how simple those questions are, and I don't care how much ignorance it exposes. So I don't mind looking stupid. And I think it's really, really important, and I've had loads of people tell me how much they've appreciated it, because I'm a senior person in this industry. So for somebody at my level to be asking simple questions and not being afraid to show ignorance, that's really enabling for those people who are brand new and feeling really insecure, really worried that they're going to look stupid and don't want to ask the question because they don't want to admit that there's something they don't know. So yes, I do ask questions for all of those reasons, but actually the main reason I ask questions is just because I want to know. And I'm nosy, and I don't care. And, I've been around long enough to have enough confidence that I don't care if people think I'm stupid. Most of the time, although even then, there are times still when I think, oh God, that question I just asked, people are going to judge me so heavily for that. Or somebody's going to come back and say, what do you mean you don't know how to do this? Who are you? And that happens. But you have to say, you know what? I didn't know, and I needed to know, so I asked. And the alternative would have been that I didn't, and I carried on not knowing. And that wouldn't have benefited anybody, because these are things that I need to know to do my job. How am I going to find out if I don't ask? So asking questions is really, really important. Yourself as a role model, but also encouraging other people to ask questions, explicitly creating environments where you encourage people to ask questions, where you tell people it's okay to ask questions. I used to work for a company where I was told in the interview that people were sacked if they didn't ask questions. I think that's going a little bit too far. But it is important, and when you work for a company like that where it is so explicit, then it means that you feel comfortable to ask questions, because you know that it's drilled into everybody. It is your job to ask and answer questions. So therefore you don't have that thing of, oh, I want to ask this person a question, but they're really busy and they're a bit grumpy, and I know they're just going to snap at me, or they're just going to tell me to go and look it up or something. And you don't want that. You don't want that as an environment. That's not a culture that you want to foster. So another strategy that I use is mob programming, and this is the beginning of a quote by a guy called Woody Zewell, who some people might have heard of, who's a big advocate for mob programming. He's also a big advocate for no estimates, which is another thing entirely, but that's just the context you might have heard his name. And the actual quote is, all the brilliant people working on the same thing at the same time, in the same space, and on the same computer. So he says brilliant people, I've said all the brilliant minds. But the idea is that you get everybody working on one computer. So this is not just pairing, this is pairing to the power of however many team members you have. And again, when I first heard about it, I was like, that's ridiculous. But it's surprisingly effective. Some people actually do it all the time. Not many. I've worked on teams where we've used it a lot of the time, or when we've had periods where we do it all the time. It's really good when you're working on a new feature or learning a new language. But getting everybody... So this is slightly different, again, to group learning, because what this is getting everybody working on your actual production software together in a room. And it's relevant to this context, because when you do that, people learn. And it means that actually, one of the reasons it's more efficient than you would think is because it dispenses with a lot of rituals that you might otherwise have. You don't need updates to the team when everybody on the team was in the room when the work was done. There's a lot less work required in terms of the work that might be being done separately by analysts and QAs if they're all in the room when the work is done. And it's a great way for people to learn. So it's another really useful technique. And this one, deep dive. So this is about encouraging people to dive deep into the technologies that you're working with, into your domain, to give them room, give them permission to spend time exploring. A lot of companies, this means having a percentage of time each week that people spend on their own personal projects. And it varies. It can be 10%, which is half a day. It can be 20%, which is a full day. It can be that they are allowed to work on personal projects that are not connected to the work they do as a team. It can be that they're mandated to work on personal projects. So the same company where we were told we'd get sacked if we didn't ask questions, we also had half a day each week to work on personal projects where we were absolutely forbidden from working on project work, as in work that the team was doing, because otherwise you just end up carrying on with your day job. And it's really good for encouraging people to spend time learning things in depth, because otherwise you do end up with a surface understanding of what technologies you're working with, and you never have time to find out why something works the way it does, or what if I wanted to do it a different way. And all of these things will only work if people feel safe and secure. So I've already referenced this, particularly in the context of asking questions. But you want to build cultures in your teams where people feel safe. And that is a big problem, not just in IT, but in commerce, in employment. People go to work and they feel insecure. I mean, even when you go to an interview, everybody knows that there are standard questions that get asked in a job interview, like, for instance, what is your biggest flaw? Now, you know that question's coming, you've prepared your answer, it's not really your biggest flaw. When somebody asks you what's your biggest flaw, you don't say, I drink 40 units of alcohol every week. You know, that's not the answer that you give him. That would be the honest answer, but that's not the one you give. You have a prepared answer. What's your biggest flaw? I'm a perfectionist. It's a big problem. You know, because actually in the workplace, what we're encouraged to do is have these fronts. We have our work self. That is the self that we believe is acceptable to our employers and to our colleagues. And those work selves, those fronts, they do not put us in a position of safety. The reason we have those fronts is because they are our armour. Why do you need armour unless you don't feel safe? So what you want in your teams is for people to feel safe, to be able to feel like they can be themselves, like they can be a bit weird sometimes, you know, that they can expose their weirdnesses and not get laughed at. Because when people feel safe, then they are much more likely to explore. They're much more likely to take risks, and risks are good, because you don't want the same old software being churned out. You don't want the same old safe routes being chosen. You actually want people to explore, you want people to innovate, and you want people to learn, and people don't do that unless they feel safe. Highlighting good examples. So this is something that I very consciously do, particularly if I know that I'm trying to teach a particular skill. So the obvious one is around unit tests. So if I've been talking to somebody about a particular technique that would be useful in a unit test, or a particular reason why I think test-driven development is effective, then when I'm just going about either the work that I'm doing, or when I'm pairing, or when I'm looking at the code base, if I spot something that's a really good example of something that I've been trying to teach, I'll make a note. And the next time I'm pairing with that person, I'll be, you know that thing we were talking about last time? I found a really good example of it. Let's have a look at it. And it's really useful, because I certainly find, and I don't think it's particularly unique to me, that when I'm learning new things, I need examples. I need something concrete. As long as it's abstract, it's quite difficult to grasp. As soon as I see an example, I'm like, oh, I see, that's what you mean. So finding examples, squirreling them away, keeping a note of them, and then, you know, presenting them to people at whatever is an appropriate opportunity. Sometimes that's, you know, I mean, some teams have, and I would recommend this, something that you call tech time or tech talk, where you all get together as a team and share things that you've learned that are useful. You know, it might be a particular feature of a language, or it might be a particular technique that you've used to solve a problem. That's a good place to share good examples. Or just in the stand-up. You know, some people have a little bit at the end of the stand-up where they share technical details. That might be a good place to say, you know what, I found this thing the other day, let me show it to you. And remember that nobody knows everything. And I've said this already, but they don't exist. And that's okay. And don't allow people to think that they do exist, because they don't. And it's paralysing. It stops people from learning. If they think that that there is this thing, this state of being that involves knowing everything, they're not going to be able to reach it, so they're not even going to try. You know, a lot of people just go, oh, it's no use, can't do it. It's not a helpful concept. So another thing is when the team have ownership of the things that they are creating and also the processes that they are using to create whatever it is they're creating. And I find that the two really useful tools in this are retros and feedback, but also, you know, giving the team agency to decide on their own rituals, their own ways of doing things, means that they're interested in what they're doing, they care about what they're doing, they're motivated to make things better if they have some control over how things work. And they're the people who know the most. The people who are writing the code are the people who know, the people who are creating the code and the people who are performing all the roles that are needed in order to do that. They're the ones who know how best to do it. So retros and feedback. Retrospectives, have them regularly, either once a week or once a fortnight, and make them safe spaces. Make it clear that people are allowed to be honest about things that aren't going well. And make sure that actions come out of those retrospectives. So when people are all agreed that something's not working, think of a new way to do it, think of an action, and make sure that you act on those. And that helps with learning, because it makes people feel like they can take charge of things. It makes people feel like they can highlight the things that they need to learn and then do something about it. And feedback as well. So this is, in ThoughtWorks, we have a very strong feedback culture. And the idea is that we are just constantly asking each other for feedback and giving each other feedback, both positive and constructive. They're both really important. If you only ever praise people, they won't believe you. If you only ever criticise people, they'll be miserable. And also, it'll just make them feel so insecure that it will affect their confidence and affect their ability to learn. So, you know, give people useful feedback on how they're doing, what they need to improve, what they need to do next. But make sure you notice when they're doing well, when they've learnt something new. Celebrate it, tell them, because it really matters. So, positive feedback that is targeted. So it's no use just saying, "Oh, great job, you're all amazing, you're doing a fantastic job." That's meaningless. And there's been a whole load of research with children that children actually don't respond well. So there's a tendency sometimes to feel like with children you should just give them praise all the time. You're amazing, you're wonderful, you're doing so well. That children are not stupid. They know when it doesn't have content. It needs to have content. It needs to be meaningful. That thing that you did there, that was really good, because that's what helps people. And being open to change. So not assuming that everything always has to be done the same way. Allowing things to change. Allowing that there will be some brand new idea that you've never heard of, that you didn't think of. The team might want to do things differently, and that's good. That's okay. You don't have to always do things the same way. So originally, this slide was just this picture. With nothing around it, just like a whole slide. And what that is an image of is a band called Napalm Death, who are a death metal band. And I went to this, I took that photo, I was just standing at the side of the stage. I went to this gig with my 14-year-old son, he's 16 now, he was 14 at the time. And he wanted somebody to go to this gig with him. And I'd heard of Napalm Death, and, you know, if you've heard of them, then you might have an idea of what kind of thing they do. So, for instance, I knew that they are in the habit of doing things like just going on stage and screaming for 2 minutes. And, you know, a lot of what they produce is not what some people would think of as music. And I wasn't entirely convinced that I really wanted to go to a Napalm Death gig, but my son wanted me to. And this gig that I went to was actually the night before the first time that I did this talk 2 years ago at Agile Manchester. And so I slipped this slide in at the last minute because I'd taken this photo and I really liked it. And I'd had such a fantastic time. It was brilliant. And it was completely unexpected. I had no idea that it would be such a joyful experience. The energy in the room, the enjoyment of the audience, the fact that the guy, I think he's called Barney, the lead singer, he would get on stage and he would just scream for 2 minutes, or sometimes there were words, you know, and they would be, you know, the guitarist would like be down in front of the speaker, deliberately creating as much feedback as possible, and there was a lot of noise, but it was amazing noise. It had this amazing energy to it, and he would do all of that, and then he'd stop, and he'd in quite this mild-mannered way talk about peace and veganism. And then he'd be off again. And just the whole thing was amazing. I had a lovely time. And the reason I put the slide in is because learning is a lot easier if you're prepared to expose yourself to new experiences. If you have an open mind, if you're like, you know what, I don't like the look of this thing, but I'm going to try it anyway. And if you encourage everybody in your team to have that attitude as well, it's a really useful attitude. Okay. This is something that I talk about a lot, and I think it's a problem that we have in this industry. So obviously, when you're teaching people, it's not helpful if you make them feel stupid. And hopefully, most of us, if we're in teaching mode, will be aware of that and will be trying not to make people feel stupid and insecure. But even when you're teaching, it is a pitfall. So when you're actually teaching, and you're thinking of yourself, I'm teaching this thing to this person, it's one of the things that's hard is that they will move more slowly than you would because they don't know the thing yet. And it's really tempting when you say to them, for instance, I like really simple things, you say to them, right, okay, now what I think you should do is create a method that does this. And they look at you and they're like, no, what? And you try and explain it again, and they still completely, they haven't even put their hands on the keyboard, they can't work out what you're on about. Really, really tempting to take the keyboard away and say, like this. And then you do it, and you do it really fast, and they go, oh, right, and they're just saying that. They don't mean it. They're not quite sure what you did, but they're aware that you're getting impatient, and they don't want to annoy you, and so they know that you want to move forward, so they're like, and they're starting to feel anxious, so they're, okay, let's just carry on. I didn't quite get that, never mind. Patience is a really hard thing, but what that is doing is it's making them feel stupid, and actually it's a big problem in this industry. We make each other feel stupid all the time. And the big example that I always give is I have lost count of the number of times that a colleague has gone to interview somebody, and then they've come back after the interview and they've said, oh my God, I just interviewed this person, and can you believe they didn't know about X? And you feel like it's okay, that person is long gone. They can't hear you dissing them, so it's all right. You're not hurting them. No, you're not, but you're hurting everybody else in the room. Because that idea that there are certain things that everybody should know, and you might think, yeah, I don't think everybody should know it, but I think all front-end developers should know it, or I think all C# developers should know it, or I think all the people in my little bit of the industry should know it. Well, no. If they didn't know it, they didn't know it. And what are you going to do about it? They have got to a place in their career, they've got to wherever they've got to, they're a professional, and they don't happen to know this thing. And that's not because they've done something wrong, it's because up to this point they haven't needed to know it, or they've learnt it and forgotten it, and we all do that, and that's okay. So that attitude that where we judge one another for what we know, it harms all of us, because the people in the room who hear you say that, what they're thinking is, oh God, I hope nobody says that about me when I'm not in the room. I hope there aren't things that everybody's judging me about. And we're all paranoid. We all worry that people are laughing at us because we don't know enough stuff. We're all, I say all, I think most people in this industry have at least some areas of insecurities. I think most of us have a lot. Things that we're worried that we don't know enough about, things that we're worried about being exposed. And we all, in order to address that, unfortunately, what we tend to do is judge others, to make ourselves feel better, and to show that we're in the club of people who know about whatever the thing is that we're judging somebody for not knowing about. And it's such a prevalent attitude that it just does make all of us paranoid, insecure wrecks, and it's not helpful. And so I talk a lot about, how we tend to make each other feel stupid. And to address this, I've come up with this concept of the stupidity manifesto. That's a really nice quote at the end. So that's a guy called Aaron Schwartz who used to work for ThoughtWorkers. Sadly, he's no longer with us, as in dead, not hasn't just left ThoughtWorks, because that's okay, you're allowed to do that. But what he said was, be curious, read widely, try new things. What people call intelligence just boils down to curiosity. That's the key. Encourage curiosity, encourage people to explore, because that's what's important. So the stupidity manifesto, let's stop making people feel stupid. Instead, let's have an explicit policy of curiosity towards all things. Let's encourage each other to shout out if we discourage curiosity. So let's ask what people need to know, not what they actually know, because actually what people need to know might be a lot less than you think. And never judge somebody because their knowledge doesn't match our knowledge, because everybody has different areas of knowledge. Give our colleagues every opportunity to learn and explore without risk. Give new people a chance to show us what they can do. So again, when you're recruiting, instead of saying, do you know A, B, C, and D, say, what do you know? What can you do? Tell me how you're amazing. Tell me what your skills are. Tell me how you can, be a really great contributor to my team. There might be things that they know that you hadn't even thought of. And they might not know the things that you had thought of, but that doesn't mean that they can't do a great job. Encourage everybody to ask questions and acknowledge the broad range of knowledge in our industry, because the range of knowledge in our industry is very wide. It's really, really, really wide. There's a whole load of stuff to learn, and there's new stuff every day. So this is my attempt to, in a graphic, describe the situation that I think happens really frequently. So what this is actually illustrating is within ThoughtWorks we have a lot of internal discussion groups, and there's a kind of an internal mailing group called software development, and there are new threads constantly popping up in there, and those threads will have titles that include words like these. And if you've subscribed to this group, then you're being constantly bombarded with these new threads. And it's very easy to think, you know what, I've no idea. I don't know about these things. I don't know about encryption. Now, I actually chose a bunch of things that at the time I didn't know about. I feel quite pleased because I've learned about a few of those since then. But at the time, all of these things made me feel a bit scared. It's like, oh shit, these people are talking about all of this stuff and I don't know about any of it. And it's tempting to think, so this is me in the middle, feeling overwhelmed, terrified, confused, stupid. And in my head, everybody else in the company looks like that. They're all really happy. And it's really easy to think that all of those people know about all of those things. But of course they don't. Because poor old Andy here has got the same view. He's looking at all of those things and thinking that all of those people know about all of those things and they're all supremely happy and confident. And guess what? Anik has the same problem. And all of these people are all in the same position. They're all looking at the other people and they're thinking, because they can see so many subjects and so many people, that all of those people know all of those things. But in fact, each of those threads has only been started by one person. There's only a handful of people contributing to each of those threads. And most of those people don't know about the other things, or aren't experts in the other things. And that's easy to forget, that everybody, that there is this enormous wealth of knowledge in the industry, but each individual only knows little subsets. And you're just one of those individuals, and they're all like you. They're all feeling confused about a lot of it. And they're only confident in some areas. And that's okay, that's actually desirable. And if you can embrace the fact that you're confused about things and see that as an opportunity to learn, that's a really helpful attitude. But it's quite hard, and you have to be reminded constantly that it's okay to not know stuff. And this is a really nice XKCD cartoon that addresses this. So I'll read it out because it's quite small text, and rather than you having to read everything. But it starts out by saying, "I try not to make fun of people for admitting they don't know things." And then he's done a bit of maths. So what he says is, for each thing everybody knows, so let's say there's a thing that we think that every single person will know by the time they're an adult. That still means that every day there's on average 10,000 people in America, because that's where he is, hearing about it for the first time. So the fraction of people who've heard of it at birth, 0. The fraction of people who've heard it by the time they're 30, 100%. And then by the US birth rate, he works out that therefore there are 10,000 people a day hearing about it for the first time. Now, if you laugh at them for not knowing, so he uses the example of the Diet Coke and Mentos thing. So that's the thing where you can put a Mento in a bottle of Diet Coke and it will fizz up and it will make this kind of fountain. It's pretty cool. And if somebody says, "I've never heard of that thing," and you go, "No, you've never heard of it? God," which we do all the time, then you're missing out, because then what they're going to do is they're either going to say, "Oh, yeah, it's okay, oh, I know that thing, yes." Or they're just going to go away and scurry off because they feel bad. What you're doing is you're missing out on the opportunity to teach them that thing and be there when they experience that joy of learning about that thing. So, so what he says, if I make fun of people, I train them not to tell me when they have those moments. And I miss out on the fun. So the little cartoon is somebody says, "Diet Coke and Mentos thing, what's that?" "Oh man, come on, we're going to the grocery store." Why? You're one of today's lucky 10,000. So that idea of the lucky 10,000, that every day there are 10,000 lucky people learning about the thing for the learning about the new thing for the first time, and you want to be there. You want to be part of that. So, more manifesto. Let's remember that our industry never stays the same. Let's remember that we all forget stuff. That's the other thing. This idea that, we learn more and more and more and more and more stuff. We do, and then a lot of it falls out the back. Certainly for me. I mean, I've been here 20 years, and there's loads and loads and loads of things that I once knew how to do that I could learn again, but I don't currently remember very much about it at all. I've probably forgotten more than I know. Lead by example. Be honest when you're confused, because that really helps other people to feel that they can be honest when they're confused. And focus on aptitude, people's ability to learn rather than what they know. Remember what it felt like when you were still learning. I can still remember what it felt like the first time I tried to use a mouse. I mean, that's because I'm old enough that I didn't get to do that as a child. So when I was a child, mouses didn't exist. Mice. It doesn't sound right, but yeah, mice didn't exist. They were not the scurrying one, it was really, really hard. I was like moving this thing around and it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do, and it was really frustrating. And I still remember what that felt like, and I remember what it feels like to be a learner, and I try and use that to empathise with people who are still learning. Prioritise clarity over jargon. So one of the things that I've noticed, and I've noticed myself doing it, is that, for instance, you go into a meeting about a technical subject, people are using really a lot of jargon, you don't understand what they're talking about. You gradually get to the point where you do understand what they're talking about, and you're very eager to prove that you can talk the language too. And you deliberately use the jargon to prove it. It's like, ha-ha, you just used the really long word, yay, I'm in the club. Meantime, somebody else is like, what the hell is she talking about? But they're not owning up to it because they feel insecure. And there's no need. There is a lot of jargon that we use in this industry that is unnecessary. And yes, okay, shortcuts are useful. So when you're in a group of people who all understand, then actually, the jargon can be useful because it's quick and efficient and everybody knows what you mean. But you need to be sure that they do. Don't assume that they do. So I tend to just use simple language for everything. And I tend to translate everything into simple language in my own head because then it's easier for me to understand. So try to avoid using jargon. And remember that all of this that I'm talking about, it might sound idealistic, but it's not idealistic, it's pragmatic. It's about how can we move forward as an industry, how can we bring new skills in, how can we have effective teams. As long as we're making each other feel stupid, as long as we're not teaching each other, as long as we're not building and fostering cultures of collaboration and learning, then we're not going to make progress. So let's stop making each other feel stupid. And that's it. There's a little bit of a puff for ThoughtWorks. I've been with them for 2 years. I think they're fantastic. We're always hiring. And that's me. If you've got any questions, so I've deliberately left time. We've got 5 minutes for questions. Yeah.
We have stand-ups every day for the team. We have stand-ups for projects within teams. We have refinement sessions, planning sessions, retros. One of the big things that comes up in retros is why is our velocity so slow? And we keep saying too many meetings. How do you get over that problem?
Okay, so the question was, one of the things that comes up in retros is that velocity is too slow, and the reason velocity is too slow is because there are too many meetings. That suggests to me that your meetings are not productive meetings. Because ideally, I would say that in most teams, you do want to be getting together as a group actually quite frequently. So things like retros are really helpful. But it's also possible to have meetings that are not productive. So retros are helpful, and workshops and group learning, and a lot of the things that I've described are things that are going to take up people's time. They're going to take them away from project work. And people won't complain about it if they feel useful. So, for instance, for me, often the lowest hanging fruit is planning meetings. And depending whether you're doing Scrum or not, anything where you're doing you're working in an agile way, in sprints, typically people will have planning meetings, they'll have sprint planning, and those meetings are often not very effective. So one of the problems can be that you spend 2 hours every sprint, sometimes 4 hours, which is just painful. And what you're doing is you're discussing the upcoming work, and you're discussing several pieces of work. So you're basically going through the whole sprint. And depending on how big your team is, that could be a lot of work. None of it's relevant in the moment. You know, at that time, people aren't about to go and do that work. And everybody in the room, again, depending how big the team is, most of them are going to know that they're never going to do that work. So, and even if they were, it's really difficult to maintain your focus and concentration, to think about every single piece of work that this team is going to address in the next sprint. Think about it properly. Think about it in a way that you're giving it your fullest attention. You're not going to, you're going to drift off. And then you're not going to remember, and then when you come to do the work, you're just going to have to ask all of those questions all over again. So I actually have often advocated to just get rid of planning meetings, or to just make them really, really simple. And one of the things that I talk about is just in time. So there's the concept of the 3 amigos or the kick-off, but immediately before somebody works on something, ideally in a pair, then they get the people that have the most context. So typically that might be a tech lead, an analyst, and a QA, but it will depend on your team and how things, and different things work differently in different places. Get together the people that matter, discuss it in detail then, immediately before you do the work, because that's when it's relevant and meaningful, and you'll pay attention to it and you'll get something out of it. So examine the meetings that you're having. Are they productive? Don't think that you just have to have meetings because somebody said you have to have meetings. If you get people together to do group learning or a workshop or whatever, have a retro at the end. Was that useful? Did I actually just have a bunch of people sitting there feeling resentful for an hour? And are they just going to go away and grumble about it because they didn't get anything out of it? I need to know that. They need to know that. We as a team need to address that. So if that's coming up a lot in your retros, then talk about why. What is it? What's wrong with these meetings? Why are they not helpful? If they're not helpful, don't do them.
I don't have meetings about why meetings are about. And a tip on pair programming. I'm right-handed. I learned to use the mouse with my left hand, so I can sit next to a person, pairing with them, and we can both reach for the mouse and both use the mouse on either side.
So that's interesting. So again, to share that, the tip was if you're pairing. Now, so his example was that he's right-handed, so he's trained himself to be able to use the mouse with the left hand. I guess that applies to anybody. Whatever is your dominant hand, learn to use the mouse with the other one, and then, ideally, you'll have a right-handed person and a left-handed person pairing, and then nobody needs to learn anything. But you're not always going to be able. Logistically, that's not going to work. But if you become ambidextrous with the mouse, and when you're pairing, you can sit in a way that both people can use the mouse. Yeah.
In those places where you go and you try and espouse the pair programming and mod programming, and there's some resistance. Do you have metrics that you can point to and say, well, look, we tried, we did, one group was completely waiting alone, one group was pair probbing and mob probbing, and same features were built, fewer issues, any metrics like that?
So the question is whether there are any metrics that show that pairing and mobbing are effective and efficient. There are. I've got a bunch of links that I can share with you. There's been various bits of research. There's one that I can never quite remember exactly, but it's something like they worked out that 2 people are only 85% as fast as 1, so they are slower, but there are 15% fewer bugs. But, you know, I mean, it is actually going to vary depending on the circumstance, and it is actually very hard to measure. But I've got a whole load of resources I can share from people who have measured it as much as they're able. And the feeling is not that it's faster, but it's not slower either. If you take into account the fact that there are fewer bugs, there's better learning spread across the team, the bus factor is lower. There are a lot of side effects of pairing that mean that overall it is just as efficient, actually more efficient because it's more effective than not pairing. And with mobbing, the only statistic that I know of is, I think it was Woody Sewell in one of his teams, they counted the number of cards that they'd addressed in a particular sprint, and it was the same number when they were mobbing as it had been when they weren't. But it is, I mean, this stuff is highly contextual and it is going to vary. But the big argument in favour of pairing is that it just consolidates knowledge. It consolidates knowledge in the team and it gives you checks and balances on the work that's being done. It removes the need for code reviews because you're reviewing each other's code constantly. It's much more effective than code reviews. I don't know about anybody else, but if you have a cadence where all work is reviewed, then, and if you've ever been a person whose job it is to do code reviews, you get a bit blind. You're like, okay, well, I'm just going to glance at it and it sort of looks okay. I mean, personally, I feel that I can't really review a piece of code unless I spend hours looking at it in detail, running the tests, making sure, doing a bit of manual testing on the output, making sure it does what it, understanding what was in the developer's mind when they did it. What does that mean? Why does that do that? What's that? You can't really do a full code review quickly, but nobody's ever given time to do it not quickly. So pairing is the best way of reviewing code. And it stops you from going down rabbit holes, so I know that I'm terrible for that. I will go off at tangents, I will go down rabbit holes, I will solve the wrong problem. And when there's somebody next to me, they'll go, Claire, why? What are you doing? What about this? And I can do the same for them. And that's really valuable. So, yeah, but I'll share links. If you come to me afterwards, I'll put them on Twitter as well. Yeah.
I'm very interested in the general category of things that you're talking about, the stupidity manifesto. I've got a lot of sympathy for it. What would your thoughts be in an environment where you think that on average too many people don't know quite as many things as they ought to, or on average too many things are really being done wrong? Mm-hmm. And would you have a view on how to approach a situation like that?
Okay, so the question is, yes, we shouldn't make each other feel stupid, but there are going to be times when the team is simply not able to do the job. I think that's what you're saying, that there might not be enough knowledge in the team.
I'm talking in particular about a situation of technical debt who are very experienced in making things work the way they have worked, mm-hmm. and there's change coming and working on the change, and working through problems associated with that change. So I am thinking about specifics.
So I think what you're saying is the example is if you've got a lot of tech debt and you want people to address that tech debt, but it's not being addressed because people have got used to working in a bad way, a way that's not effective, and you want to address that. I think, is your question how to address that without making people feel stupid?
I'm thinking about the situation where you're really trying to avoid negativity, trying to share where you've got things wrong, because where you wrote some of the technical debt in the first place,
mm-hmm.
But even so, how to approach this kind of learning where some people don't know, where you think things are a bit wrong, and
mm-hmm.
you're trying to teach people out the wrong way of doing things. So
yeah.
I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so when you think people are not doing things in the right way, or things, when you might include yourself in that things haven't been done the right way, and you want to... and you want to teach them better ways of doing things without judging them or making them feel stupid. So that is about that's why ownership is important, and that's about creating environments where everybody in the team can go, you know what, this isn't great. But it's also, sometimes you do have to, you have to be able to have arguments with people. You have to have an environment where it's possible, and you build that by having an inclusive environment, by encouraging questions, encouraging learning. But you sometimes have to be able to say, you know what, I have a problem with the way we've done this. But in that case, first of all, you need an environment that's safe, where people trust each other. And then you have to be able to say, look, this I don't think this is right, and I think it needs changing, and here's why. Give examples. Don't just say, this is shit, we need to do it differently. Say, I have problems with this, and this is why. Explain. Be prepared to defend yourself, but be prepared to have people push back. Because sometimes it's very easy to land in a team, have a particular idea of how things should be done, and this is a problem that we as consultants face a lot, and it's something we have to remind ourselves of. You can arrive somewhere and think, I know the best way of doing everything. These people are doing it all wrong. I need to educate them. And you weren't there when they did the things that they did, and you don't have complete knowledge of the domain or the constraints that they were facing, and you have to give them a chance to explain to you why things are the way they are. And you also have to acknowledge that everybody builds tech debt into their products, that nobody is perfect. It doesn't matter how brilliant you are, there will be a time in the future when you look at it and you think, oh God, why did we do that? And you know that you've done it yourself, so you shouldn't judge other people when you can see that they've done it. And by giving everybody ownership, so everybody's able to hold their hands up and say, you know what, this isn't that great. And let's build in safety, let's build in time when we can address things, but let's also have a culture where we feel happy and confident to disagree with each other. Have an argument, get it out there. So we've run out of time, sorry, I've taken you all over by 5 minutes, so I should let you go. But